Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar called Invisible Enemies. I'm Stacy Malesiewski, and I will be your host for the next 3 days as we explore one of the most urgent and clinically relevant topics in environmental medicine today, and that is the pollutants that are triggering immune dysfunction. Because what we breathe can be just as impactful on the body as what we eat or drink, but it's not always talked about. And so, for many patients, the chronic symptoms that are related to these toxin exposures go unidentified, sometimes even for years. So, this is such an important topic of conversation. So, I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by two incredible naturopathic doctors, Dr. Anne-Marie Fine and Dr. Lyn Patrick, who are quite literally on the front lines of this issue. And so, they're going to be sharing clinical insights, emerging data, practical tools to help you better assess, diagnose, and treat patients impacted by some of these airborne pollutants. So, welcome to you both. I thank you for being with us today.
Well, thanks for inviting us.
All right. So, to begin, let's kind of just define the scope of the issue, I guess. Dr. Fine, maybe we can start with you. If, from a clinical lens, how do you categorize airborne pollutants, and how should physicians be thinking about them in relation to chronic disease?
Well, I would say clinically, we need to start asking about and talking about the airborne pollutants, particularly the indoor air pollutants, as they're higher than the outdoor air pollutants. And people spend about 90% of their time indoors. This is a hidden source of toxicants. And according to the World Health Organization, data shows 99% of the world's population is breathing air that falls short of their guideline limits. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or the IARC, classifies outdoor air pollution as carcinogenic to humans, group 1 carcinogen, and the subset of particulate matter, PM, is also carcinogenic to humans. And so why is this important for a webinar series on indoor air pollution? Because our indoor air starts with outdoor air. And then we have an off-gassing of things in our built environment that are polluting the indoor air, materials used to build the home, cleaning supplies, air fresheners, benzene stoves. We're going to talk about that. Mold, other biological toxins, carpets and flooring both attract and hold onto pollutants and off-gas pollutants, glues, solvents, adhesives, etc. There are no cancer risks hiding in your living room. And so in this webinar, we want to uncover them.
Okay. So when we talk about, I guess, the most common, what are the key toxicants that you're seeing today that are kind of flying under the radar in mainstream medicine? If we had to kind of, I guess, narrow them down to, let's say, the top 5, what would they be? I mean, outside of obviously the big ones you had just mentioned, mold, Lyme, we know that those are massive problems and could be within our top 5, but we could spend a whole show on each one of those. So what would be the big top 5 in your opinion? Maybe Dr. Patrick.
So the importance of these top 5 that we're going to be discussing, and we train clinicians, and so we really try to, I'm going to say, make the invisible visible. So we're going to try and make what have been, for most healthcare providers, invisible causes of immune toxicity, disease, I'm even talking about infection, and common, both acute and chronic symptoms.
Okay.
We're going to try and talk about those. So first, and certainly has been in the news a lot lately, microplastics. Dr. Fine has been talking about microplastics for years. And so she's really, I think, one of the experts in the field of environmental medicine. So she's taught me a lot. Happy to join her in that discussion. Number 2, she talked about air pollution. We categorize air pollution based on the actual size of the molecule. So PM short for particulate matter. And the most common one is PM 2.5, which means particulate matter 2.5 microns in diameter. So we're going to talk about particulate matter. We're going to talk about something that most clinicians have no idea what it even is, and that is dioxin. Dioxin is an extremely toxic environmental pollutant that is common both as an exposure source. East Palestine, Ohio is a really good example. Dioxins are created by wildfire, so certainly the both forest fires and the building fires that we recently had, dioxins is one of the serious. It's considered like the second most carcinogenic toxicant in our environment in terms of our pollutant exposome, right? What we're exposed to. So PM 2.5 microplastics, dioxins, and I'm going to be talking about two very, very common indoor air pollutants, benzene and formaldehyde. They come from a variety of sources. We're going to do a deep dive on that. And they are commonly used in the production of a lot of the things that are found in the average home. And again, they're invisible. You can smell benzene, you cannot smell formaldehyde. And most people have no idea that they're being exposed to either of these two solvents. And they are very commonly a cause of many common problems that are misdiagnosed as the flu or allergies or asthma. So we'll talk about that as well.
Great. Okay. So we have our top five. We have microplastics, PM 2.5, dioxins, formaldehyde, benzene. So I'd like to, as you said, we're kind of dive deeper into each of these pollutants. So maybe let's start with, the first one on the list, microplastics. They've been obviously making waves in the news lately. They're showing up now, in human blood, lungs, even in placenta. So from a clinical standpoint, how concerned should we be, and how are patients being exposed to these?
Well, micro and nanoplastics have become the top environmental threat to the human population in the 21st century. And it pretty much snuck up on us because 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, we started hearing about mountains of plastic accumulating in the ocean. And then we started hearing about how the microplastics were getting into the fish and other marine animals. And, now they have crossed the final frontier. They're being found in every single human organ autopsied where they were looking for it. And in particular, they have been found in the brain, which is concerning because we do have a blood-brain barrier. And in the past 8 years, the amount of microplastics that have accumulated in the brain has actually increased 50% in only 8 years. And so we need to talk about what are some of these sources for micro and nanoplastics. And we already talked a little bit about, fish and seafood. I believe those are relatively minor sources of microplastics. And some bigger sources are going to be 1 liter plastic bottle of water contains 240,000 bits of microplastics. Yeah. Wow. Nobody knows this.
Yeah.
People are buying these plastic bottles because they believe the water inside is filtered or alkaline, or it has some sort of functional property that they're looking for. At the very least, they believe they're getting better water.
So you're talking about the water that's pre-filled, not just the plastic water.
Like the flats of water people buy at Costco, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We're talking about that.
And then also one of our colleagues who is a microplastics researcher has identified that when you screw off that plastic top on the liter of bottled water, that releases thousands and thousands and thousands of microplastic particles into the water. And she's a very conventional science researcher at the University of New Mexico, and even she said this is horrifying, the levels of microplastics they're finding in the human body, and that no one should ever drink or eat out of plastic, period.
Wow.
She's the same researcher who was saying that she believes a lot of the plastics that are getting into these liter plastic bottles are from the bottling factories and have to do with the plastic lids too.
Okay.
It's creating this cloud of microplastics in the factory and just getting in there.
Then they're bottling it, and then
they're bottling it. So plastic water out, all plastics out, 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 and that goes for plastic tea and all the other plastic bottled drinks. Another hidden source, and this one is so easy to overcome, is microplastics in paper cups that you get at Starbucks or any other coffee shop, because those paper cups are not actually paper. If they were paper, the hot liquid would go right through it and you would be burned and you would have a lawsuit on your hands. No, they are lined with plastic, polyethylene. That's how you can hold a cup, not burn yourself, and it stays in the cup. 25,000 bits of microplastic are released into the hot liquid in 15 minutes. And not only that, toxic heavy metals like lead, chromium, and cadmium were also detected in the film. They also leach into the water. And not to be left out, our favorite toxin of all, BPA, leaches from the lid into the beverage as well. So that one is so easy to overcome. Just bring your own cup to the coffee shop.
Yeah.
But Dr. Fine, what you taught me that I just was completely ignorant of is how much of an exposure air is for microplastics. I had no idea.
that was the big surprise, was that when I first started researching and talking about microplastics, we really focused on non-air sources, and the newer research articles are showing that probably our largest source of microplastics is just plain old indoor air. It's in the outdoor air too, don't get me wrong, but it's in our indoor air too, because we have plastics in our home, like shower curtains and whatnot, that are also kind of off dusting. We have plastic flooring. Our new homes all have this luxury vinyl flooring. It's plastic. It's just off dusting phthalates and plastic right into your home. So it turns out indoor air is a huge, huge source of microplastics, which is one of the reasons we're talking about it. We're talking about it first in this webinar because nobody knows this. So you have to be able to mitigate it right in your home.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, to your point, people think about what they might be eating or consuming, but they don't think about the indoor air as often. So
yeah, we find even in clinicians, they're not thinking about indoor air. It's all invisible. It's out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
And that's another reason why we wanted to do this webinar, was to talk about all the things we're missing in people's homes. It's low-hanging fruit. There are things we can do to mitigate this beautifully.
Great. So I want to kind of switch gears to number 2. That was our big number 1, obviously. But number 2, I feel like, is not any less important. Particulate matter, PM 2.5 specifically. So when we're talking about this, I mean, PM 2.5, it's small enough to penetrate deep into the lungs, even enter systemic circulation. So we know this. We hear a lot about PM 2.5 and, PM 10 when it comes to outdoor air pollution. But what are the most, common real world sources of particulate matter exposure that are affecting patients?
Yeah, you make a really good distinction there. We know about the outdoor sources, sure, from traffic and wildfires and combustion. But in the indoor environment, believe it or not, we have PM 2.5. And the sources would be the burning of candles, incense, or wood burning. PM 2.5 is a product of combustion. Printers are a big source of PM 2.5. We open the windows, and obviously there's PM 2.5 and 10 in the outdoor air. So remember what I said at the beginning of the webinar. The quality of our indoor air starts with what's coming in from the outside. So the outside air does matter as well. And then we have cooking related emissions. We have airborne allergens and bacteria. We have chemical reactions, chemical cleaning supplies and cleaning activities that can create PM 2.5. And so those are some of the hidden sources of PM 2.5 in the home. And they are very important. They are carcinogens. Also, I want to say the use of fireplaces, unvented space heaters, kerosene heaters and cooking, and of course, tobacco and other smoking products, which thankfully is on the decrease, but those are sources as well. And then wildfire and wildfire residential interface fires. I mean, those are putting out a lot of PM 2.5, and yes, they can get into the homes. In fact, 90% of wildfire smoke, about 90% of the total particle mass is PM 2.5.
Okay. Are there particular cities, occupational exposures, patient populations where PM toxicity is showing up more aggressively in labs or in symptoms?
I can address that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very good study on a population of older individuals that live in a little town called Seeley Lake, Montana, outside of Missoula. And I don't know if you remember, but there were a lot of bad wildfires in Canada back in 2015, 2017. And this population was already being monitored. So they have pre-exposure data on them. And then they're going back and looking at post-exposure data. And what they found just in the intervening, I believe it's 3 or 4 years post that 1 or 2 weeks of wildfire smoke exposure, is that a measurement of respiratory capacity that we as doctors use to identify the health of the lungs. It's called forced expiratory volume, or FEV, and it's exactly what it says. How much can you exhale? How forcefully can you exhale? So what they found is that measurement decreased significantly more than would be expected in that intervening number of years, just because of that 2-week exposure to wildfire smoke. Now, this data, I think, was published in 2019. I can't remember the date of that particular paper, but they are continuing to monitor this population. Montana has a pretty big problem, of course, with wildfire smoke, just because they're close to Canada, right? They also get all the wildfire smoke that came over from the Pacific coast during the Oregon and Washington fires. And so it's an example of what we now know, even a short-term exposure of high levels of PM 2.5. But I want Dr. Fine to talk about 9/11, because I think that's an even better example of what high levels of PM 2.5 can do.
Well, the 9/11 story is very interesting, not just for PM 2.5, but for dioxin levels and asbestos and lead and microplastics. It was a huge conflagration of buildings that burned for days. The 9/11 story is very personal to me, because what happened in 9/11 is everyone focused on the tragedy of these people who were caught in these buildings that caught on fire and were not able to get out. And what happened was with time and research, they discovered that the first responders were getting sick from these outdoor environmental exposures. Mm-hmm. And what's crazy is the former head of the EPA went on record saying, no, about 2 days after 9/11, she went on record saying, no, the air is clean, it's okay. And so nobody knew that they were being exposed until they started developing illnesses, acute illnesses like respiratory illnesses, but more long-term. A lot of people develop cancer. And my mother was one of them. She was a Red Cross nurse who volunteered at Ground Zero after 9/11. And she thought that the air was clean too. And it turned out she was one of thousands of people who subsequently went on to develop cancer and pass. And so this is one of the inspirations for me to create a course for people to understand what's in our environment, because you don't know, and you're not going to be told by the government or whoever. It's best to be educated on what to look for in an environmental, chemical disaster, wildfire, because people don't get the right information at the right time. And we see this over and over. East Palestine, we saw that as well. The LA fires, we're seeing it now. Some data scientists are having to crowdsource testing to get the kind of testing that they need, because it's not being done. And this is how we know that there are dioxins and a lot of lead and PM 2.5 and VOCs are 4 to 5 times higher in intact homes that just happen to be in the area. And so this is why we're so passionate about educating everyone on the environment and what you need to learn to protect yourself and your families.
I think it's, everybody's familiar with the saying, that a fish is only as healthy as the water it swims in. And yet somehow when it comes to humans, that mentality is kind of dropped away. We don't think about what we're swimming in all day long, and what we're breathing. So this is an incredibly important conversation. Thank you for sharing that. I want to get into number 3. You just mentioned it briefly. The third pollutant on our top 5 list, which is dioxins. Dioxins are persistent organic pollutants that, if I'm not mistaken, many doctors don't really even think to screen for. So, they're not part of the everyday clinical conversation, but they are among the most toxic compounds in existence, correct?
That is correct. They are the second most carcinogenic substance known to man that nobody ever talks about, but they were very highly prevalent in 9/11, but they were also highly prevalent in East Palestine. And when East Palestine happened, Dr. Patrick and I immediately knew, since they burned vinyl chloride, like 5 cars full, we knew burning plastic creates dioxin. Immediately, we were on high alert. We were getting calls from clinicians from the Midwest area. We don't know what to do. And we were able to put together a white paper on dioxins, and we were able to present it to actually hundreds of integrative physicians in New York City about 2.5 weeks later. So that was great. And what we discovered is that nobody had been educated on dioxins. It was not even on their radar. Now, this is a big point I want to bring up. They did not really test for dioxins until months later, but eventually a group of atmospheric scientists published a paper on pollutants from East Palestine. And where did they travel to? On their plume, on the winds. Where did they go? Because remember, the only area that was evacuated was 1 square mile, I believe. And they found that these pollutants, including dioxin, traveled to 16 different states and southern Canada. People do not like to believe that things that they see in the news have anything to do with them, because they don't understand how the wind blows things around. There are studies showing that certain pesticides applied in Africa show up in Florida a few days later. Wildfire smoke can travel 1,000 miles or more. And so we have to consider, this is another reason why we need to really learn about these environmental exposures. This is the story with dioxins. So now the LA fires from January of this year, so just a few months ago, I looked every day for the lab results for dioxin. Why isn't anyone looking for this? And eventually I found it just a few days ago. Of course, they're finding dioxins in intact homes in the LA area, around the areas that burned. It's not on anybody's radar, but we do know they are carcinogenic, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But I would say dioxins are created, they're unwanted byproducts of industrial processes using chlorine-based chemicals like waste incineration. And then the burning of homes, which are filled with plastics and may even have vinyl siding on the outdoor or the outside of the house. That's like gasoline for a fire. So yes, we are getting a lot of dioxin in the environment.
Is it just the environment, or are there, I guess, dietary sources of dioxins?
Yes. In the literature, you will see that most dioxin exposure is felt to come from dietary sources like meats, fish, dairy products. Because why? Because it's in our environment. It's a persistent organic pollutant, like you began the conversation with. And so our animals that we eat are, they're eating the grass that has dioxin in it. It's getting into our animals' milk, and it's in the ocean. It's getting into our fish. So definitely, and that's why, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. That's why we all have a background burden of dioxin already in our body, because we have to eat, right? And so this is why it's even more important to control the other amounts of dioxin that you might be exposed to in your environment via the other things we just talked about, because we already have some, and it's got a very long half-life, and it's very, very difficult to get rid of. So we just need to be even more vigilant that we don't take on even more dioxins.
So we're already burdened based on
we already
Yeah.
have everybody, all of us. Yep.
Can I just add one comment?
Yes.
In the 90s, nobody knows about this because the EPA has buried it, sadly. But in the 90s, the Environmental Protection Agency did this amazing study called the NHATS study, NHATS, National Human Adipose Tissue Study. And they looked at 20,000 adipose tissue samples. Some of these were from cadavers. Some of them were from surgical removal of adipose tissue. What did they find? Pesticides, solvents, and some chlorinated, that's what dioxin is, compounds in 100% of these adipose samples. This was in the 90s, right? So we do carry a body burden. Now, as environmental medicine physicians, we do have protocols to minimize that, to actually eliminate some of that body burden, right? We have studies and data on this. We have clinical protocols. But Anne-Marie's absolutely right. What we have to do is minimize exposure. And sadly, even in today's functional medicine or integrative medicine environment, the dominant paradigm is to put pills down people's throats, right? What's the pill for this and the pill for that, or the magic potion for this, or the magic potion for
or
that.
the supplement for this.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The supplement or the a bioregulator or there are a million new things on the market, right? Both integrative and standard pharmaceutical. What we are talking about is changing that paradigm and identifying, identifying, and creating a culture where we actually avoid taking on toxicants. And that takes education, right? It's a real switch for doctors to go, well, why would that make a difference? Why would avoiding pesticide or PM 2.5 or microplastic exposure change people's health? It dramatically changes people's health condition. And there's data on this. There are published studies where I think, Stacy, I was talking to you about this, where University of San Antonio, Department of, I'm going to forget the actual name of the department, but it's environmental medicine department, where they actually have teams of doctors that go into the homes of chemically intolerant or multiply chemically sensitive or chronically fatigued, whatever label you want to give folks who are chronically ill and can't tolerate chemical exposure, to actually identify what's in their air. They actually do air studies and look at the air pollutants, and then they write a prescription to clean up the indoor air environment. And lo and behold, the patients who follow through, and we'll talk about exactly what they do, but the patients who follow through get better.
Yeah.
Why is this not the first thing that doctors do when they have chronically ill patients? Because we live in a paradigm where what you do is, first of all, blame a bacteria, a virus, a spirochete, a fungus, and treat that with a pill.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I believe, that both the public and integrative functional medicine practitioners are waking up and going, oh my God, I didn't learn this in medical school. I've got to learn this, and I've got to do something about it, because this is the cause. And I say that very purposefully. I'm saying this on purpose. The cause of most chronic disease.
Yeah. I think it's, like you said, a complete and total shift. But preventing the exposure, like you said.
And it's the number one rule of toxicology, standard conventional toxicology. Number one rule: avoid the exposure, remove the person from the exposure, remove the exposure from their environment, right? That's the number one rule. We're not following it in medicine for reasons that have to do with the dominant paradigm and who controls that. But we're going to change that.
And surprisingly, people aren't getting better in that paradigm. So
exactly, right.
So that's why we're here today, right? So I'd like to maybe talk about number 4 on the list, if we could switch into that, and that's formaldehyde. This exposure is still shockingly common nowadays because it's still so, I guess, widely used in various things, construction, manufacturing, even obviously we talked a little bit about it already, the consumer products. But
yes,
where are you seeing hidden sources of formaldehyde exposure in patients' lives? I mean, what's the big one, or maybe there's a few big ones?
The Big 10. I can give you the Big 10.
Yeah.
Okay, so first, let's recognize that formaldehyde is formed naturally in the human body. So we actually make it. It's not that foreign a molecule to our bodies, but the amount of formaldehyde we're exposed to triggers an immune reaction. So I want to just start there. Okay. Formaldehyde is also found in petroleum products. So think about gasoline, natural gas, gas that might escape from the burner of your stove, where we find exposures that make people sick. And I say that very specifically because when I was in training in environmental medicine, one of my mentors, Dr. William Ray, who was a cardiothoracic surgeon and also an environmental medicine specialist, was very clear that most of his patients who became chronically ill and chemically intolerant, which, by the way, there's data that shows that up to a third of the population is chemically intolerant, so it's not rare. that these people inordinately had been exposed to gas appliances, so gas stoves, gas furnaces, gas fireplaces, gas water heaters, right? And so the problem is that both formaldehyde and benzene can escape from those appliances. The other place that we see it commonly is in new home furnishings. So new carpets, it's used as part of the mix, the chemical mix for the adhesive of the carpet. It's used in, I think Dr. Fine mentioned, luxury vinyl flooring. So it's used in the production of that. And these compounds are solvent. They're called volatile organic compounds for a reason, because they volatilize. They're not sealed into, let's say, the brand new pressboard desk that I might be sitting at, right? And I can't smell formaldehyde, so I don't know that it is off gas from my brand new pressboard desk or dining room table or whatever. Now, industry is using less and less of this composite wood product that is also called pressboard. So that's becoming less of a problem, but it is still a problem. Well, one of my really, really sick patients who was mold exposed became basically debilitated when she bought a brand new bed. And guess what that bed was made out of? A composite wood pressboard headboard. And she was sleeping right next to it, right? So she was breathing in all of that formaldehyde at night. And she was disabled, basically. She got better, but we had to identify the source. The other big source that nobody thinks about is paint. Paint off gases formaldehyde. Standard paints off gas a lot of VOCs, but part of that is formaldehyde. Ceiling caulks, so building caulk that's used in brand new construction, off gases formaldehyde. Upholstery fabric, off gases formaldehyde. I mentioned the vinyl flooring. One of my I really loved this patient. She was a farmer and she had been environmentally ill, but she got better. And she called me up one day and she said, I am going downhill fast. You've got to figure out what's going on. I have no idea. And so I did a house call, which I used to do. It's kind of the best way to figure this out. I walked into her home and I had this I'm also formaldehyde exposed occupationally, so I have antibodies to formaldehyde, so I'm pretty sensitive to formaldehyde. And I went in there and I said, did you just do some renovation? He goes, oh, don't worry about it. It's green bamboo flooring. We just installed it in the upstairs, so the whole upstairs flooring was just replaced. Think about how big bamboo is. It's pretty small. Guess what glues it together? Formaldehyde-based glue. So I don't care whether the box says green, eco, whatever it is, there's a lot of off-gassing formaldehyde in bamboo flooring. Anyone who works in a hospital environment, there's a lot of formaldehyde. Pathologists who use formalin, right, based preservatives. All formalin is formaldehyde in water. That's what formalin is. And there are a lot of other compounds that are formaldehyde equivalent. Now, we're giving everyone a really great slide set that it took us a long time to put together. So I hope you appreciate it. I hope you look at it. And it will give you.
Put it in the show notes for sure to download. Yeah.
Yes, downloadable in the show notes. It will provide all of you with tons of information about the other compounds that are formaldehyde just in other names, right? So you can identify that. So a lot of occupational exposure in medical related profession. Air cleaners that produce ozone. We're going to talk about air cleaners in part 3, but no one should buy an air cleaner that produces ozone because ozone is damaging. I know the ozone layer is good, but it's up there, far away from us. We do not want ground level ozone in any way, shape, or form. Ozone can be used in the remediation of wildfire damaged or building fire damaged furniture, but no human should be in that environment when ozone is being used. And so air cleaners that produce ozone also produce formaldehyde. Attached garages, when people warm up their car in an attached garage, that formaldehyde makes its way, as well as benzene, make their way into the home environment. Mothballs. I didn't think people used mothballs anymore, but I was sadly corrected when I had patients who were like, oh yeah, we use mothballs all the time. We pack all our sweaters in mothballs. Well, guess what's in a mothball that kills the moths? Formaldehyde. Guess where the formaldehyde goes when the mothballs are packed in with the sweaters? It goes into the clothing. And speaking of clothing, wrinkle-free permanent press clothing is wrinkle-free and permanently unwrinkled because formaldehyde is put into the fabric. And there are some very good cases in the medical literature, and I've seen them, of patients who get contact dermatitis of all kinds, let's just say rashes, from the formaldehyde in the clothing, because formaldehyde is a sensitizing agent. The immune system reacts to formaldehyde. So there are a lot of, we'll talk about this later, a lot of autoimmune conditions that are related to formaldehyde exposure.
Right. So basically what I'm hearing in all of this, formaldehyde is everywhere. You named a thousand different things, just in the home. So should practitioners be screening for formaldehyde when patients move into, like, say, newly built homes, or they renovate spaces, or installing? I feel like that should be like the thing that they start with, maybe asking the questions about the home, right?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think we're going to go over a case, a really sad but really incredibly important case of formaldehyde exposure in part 2. But James Dahlgren, who is an industrial hygienist, who's brilliant. He did some stuff at 9/11. He also was one of the main physicians in this formaldehyde case, states in the paper that was published on this patient, every patient with autoimmune disease needs to be evaluated for formaldehyde exposure. Now, for the healthcare providers in the audience today, it is difficult to do that because we have an enzyme, formaldehyde dehydrogenase, that breaks down formaldehyde very quickly. So you're not going to find it in the urine. If you've got somebody who's occupationally exposed and they're exposed to huge amounts of formaldehyde, they will urinate away some formaldehyde. But for most of us, the only way we can look in the blood is for the antibodies to the adducts, or the way that the formaldehyde combines with serum albumin. So there is actually a slide on this in your slide set with a link to the laboratory that does the test so that you can learn about that. But a better way, a more effective way to test for formaldehyde, and Stacy told me she just bought a unit, is to actually buy a formaldehyde detection unit. They're very inexpensive. I think right now they're about $135 on Amazon.
I got mine for $99.
Yeah. Oh, wow, they're on sale. That's great.
Yeah.
So the company is a company that there are many formaldehyde detectors, but I'll tell you this one for a reason. And we don't have any financial relationship with them. The company is called AirKnight, AIRKNIGHT, 9-in-1 air monitor. And the reason I like it is because the formaldehyde limit of detection goes down to 0.1 parts per million, not 0.3 parts per million. And you need that 0.1 parts per million detection because many people are sensitive to very low levels of formaldehyde. Now, even the EPA, who writes a lot about this and has really good information on formaldehyde, says it may be literally impossible to bring down indoor air residential levels of formaldehyde to safe levels. Why do they say that? Because 0.1 parts per million is very low. And if you've got a new home that's got luxury vinyl flooring and curtains and upholstery, etc., and a brand new gas stove with no hood vent, it is going to be very hard to bring that down without air filtration. And that's really the best thing that you can do, in addition to getting rid of all of those plug-in
Yeah.
air fresheners that nobody should have in their homes. They're so toxic, really. But that's really, I think, a more clinically effective way to do it is get people to make the invisible visible. Get people to find out what's in their indoor air. And once they do, and they connect it to their allergies, their asthma, their headaches, their brain fog, their children's asthma, their respiratory difficulties. There's even some good data looking at some of these solvents causing COPD in an indoor environment, right? So once we make that connection, then it's a lot easier for the healthcare provider to go ahead and prescribe remediation.
Right. I'd like to get into number 5. We've kind of been going back and forth and mentioned it a couple different times already today, but that's benzene. And it's another one I feel like that's just kind of flying under the radar, even in integrative clinical practice. So
yes,
this is number 5 on our list, and we typically associate benzene, with industrial jobs, right? Like gas stations, heavy industry. But what are other occupational or environmental benzene risks, that clinicians should be aware of so that they can properly ask questions?
There are many, but I'm going to try and hit the highlights here. Benzene is a known class 1 carcinogen, so is formaldehyde, and those are carcinogens that are known to cause cancer in humans. So it is a known cause of cancer in humans. There are many indoor and outdoor exposures for benzene. One that I'm particularly familiar with because of where I live, and there's a ton of information in this on the slide set, is the outdoor exposure that comes inside for those who live near what are called unconventional oil and gas wells. That's just another name for fracking. So fracking is a way that we pull oil and gas out of the ground, and it's really the only way that's used anymore. The conventional oil and gas well technology really is not used. But benzene levels inside the homes that are near these fracking operations can be significantly over the allowable, it's regulated in outdoor air, right? The allowable EPA limits. There is a map of the United States in your slides that looks specifically at levels of benzene related to elevated cancer risk in states where the air levels have been documented to be high as a result of their proximity to gas and oil wells. So that's New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Louisiana, West Virginia, and North Dakota by county. So it's actually a searchable database, so you can look that up. Another place that we don't really talk about, and I'm talking about healthcare providers as well as just the general public, is that there are some consumer products that absolutely off-gas benzene. The one that I think is the most important for healthcare providers to know about are memory foam mattresses and pillows and toppers. And this is actually documented in the medical literature. That study and the reference for it are in your slides. Now, there are about 61 petroleum-based compounds. Memory foam is made out of petroleum. Memory foam is made out of petroleum-based compounds. That's what foam is. Foam is a petroleum-based mixture. Almost all of them are solvents and VOCs, and what that means is that they off-gas. So I'm going to quote from one of the studies now, specifically looking at the amount of benzene that off-gases from a new memory foam mattress. Exposure levels estimated for sleeping children and infants indicate that a bed can be a significant contributor to VOC, volatile organic compound exposure. And what that means is significant enough to cause disease, to cause damage. And sadly, one of the most common, known, well-established ways that benzene causes damage is to damage the bone marrow in the body and cause cancer. Another place is carpet. Carpet is a known source of a lot of different solvents, and particularly benzene. Hexane, styrene, toluene. There are a lot of compounds that off gas. Many of them are just the adhesive that sticks the carpet to the carpet backing. So it's not so much the fibers of the carpet themselves, but how the carpet is constructed with a carpet backing. The other and final place that we have to be very careful about are gas and propane stoves and furnaces and water heaters. We were always taught, natural gas, it's safe, it's economical, it's clean. It's none of those things except maybe economical. And studies that were done in California and in Colorado, actually going into homes and collecting the air with the burner on high or the stove on 350 degrees, show that the benzene level in the bedroom furthest from the kitchen can be over the allowable EPA outdoor limit. So this is a big problem if there's no vent hood for the stove, and if that vent hood isn't used. Both of those can be problematic. So all of these are significant sources of benzene in the indoor environment. And the last, I said it was the last, but really the last is if you've got an attached garage and you warm up your car in the winter in that attached garage. And this can be really problematic for everybody in the home, especially infants and children who experience respiratory problems as a result of that exposure, like asthma.
Wow. So there are a lot of different exposures that people aren't really thinking about. I mean,
nobody's thinking about them.
Yeah. So, well, I think this is probably a really good place, a good sobering place to stop for today. So I just want to thank all of you, for being with us on day one of our webinar. I really hope that today's insights that Dr. Patrick and Dr. Fine have provided have really started to deepen your clinical awareness of environmental toxicity and its role in patient health, and inspired you to dig a little deeper into how these exposures might be impacting your patients. So be sure to join us tomorrow for day 2. We're going to take this conversation even further when we discuss how these pollutants can dysregulate the human immune system, causing both immune suppression as well as autoimmunity. So tomorrow we're going to explore these big top 5 airborne toxins and how they are disrupting immune signaling, creating chronic inflammation, and can even act as, triggers for autoimmune conditions. So you will not want to miss it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.